The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Dylan J. Schlender presiding. Will all eyes for the Honorable Judge Schlender.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of Pride and Prejudice, 2005, versus Bridget Jones's Diary. The 2005 film adaptation of Jane Austen's novel, Pride and Prejudice, tells the story of Elizabeth Bennet, who becomes romantically entangled with a proud man from a higher class. Bridget Jones's Diary is a 2001 romantic comedy and a reinterpretation of Austen's novel about a young woman who finds herself caught between two contentious rivals for her affection. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, in civil cases like this, the counsel appointed to represent each film will present their case for why their client is the superior movie. And ultimately, the jury will render its verdict as to which is the better film. This decision will hereby stand in all rankings and listicles from now on until the end of time ad infinitum. Mr. Big Ben Haslar, you are here appearing on behalf of Pride and Prejudice. You may present your opening statement.
No, Daniel Craig is a superior Bond since he is...
No, stop. We talked about this, counselor. This is the Jane Austen episode. You're representing Jane Austen.
Vincent Price has done many a Bond.
Nice try.
Fine.
Nice try. Stick to Miss Austen.
Fine. Well, I feel like I'm the last guy on Earth qualified to comment on Jane Austen, but I'll do my best.
You were.
Pride and Prejudice.
We looked.
Yes, I know. I'm second to last, probably. Pride and Prejudice, the novel, is a renowned work of art. And while I think we barely scratched the surface in my own understanding, I can tell that the film version has benefits that the novel has the benefit of being built on this foundation. It doesn't stray too far from that source material, nor should it. If it's not broken, why fix it? All they had to do was transfer page to celluloid, and they've got a winner. And indeed, that's what they've done, resulting in a beautifully shot film with a tight narrative. Bridget Jones, the book, I guess it's popular in certain audiences, but it's hardly as renowned. I doubt many people would even know about it if it weren't for the movie. The humor is often hit and miss. The only things that are particularly profound about it were lifted from the pages of Jane Austen. Sure, these two projects were aiming for different tones, but what we have here are two films produced by the same studio, both based on books, both on the themes of Pride and Prejudice, one diluted and one straight from the tap. Both have strong female leads, both nominated for Best Actress, both lost that honor, and both have Mr. Darcy's. When comparing the two, ask yourself, which makes you feel the most? Which makes you understand the human condition more? I think unquestionably the answer would come back in favor of my client. My client peels back the layers of how people interact with each other and how first impressions aren't always to be trusted. Bridget Jones has the corny Hollywood message, just love people for what they are. Yeah, thanks. I never heard that one before. And although I'm much more at home discussing the MCU or Japanese horror, I'll endeavor to prove that my client Pride and Prejudice is the superior film today.
Thank you, Mr. Haslar. Appearing on behalf of Bridget Jones's Diary is Mr. Professor Jeremy Black. Please present your opening statement.
Well, I'd like to hear our last speaker on Japanese horror. There is, of course, Pride and Prejudice.
Next episode.
Which is a brilliant film. No, first of all, I don't think we're in any way discussing the strengths or weaknesses of Jane Austen. A great novelist and a novelist, not somebody who wrote a screenplay. That wasn't even conceivable in that age. In that age, you could write a novel that you wanted transposed to the theatre. Actually, Jane Austen didn't, but you could do that. But there was no suggestion that you would actually be going to what we're doing at the present day. So what have we got when we've got both Bridget Jones and the 2004 version of Pride and Prejudice? And let me make it clear, they are both worthy of consideration. Neither of them is an epic. All right, let's just make that clear. They are both versions of Pride and Prejudice. They are transmuted in different ways, and they are more or less, and in each case I would argue less, true to the original. But then that's not surprising, because the original is not a visual medium, wasn't intended as that. So why I'd like to suggest, with both of them being good, why I'd like to suggest Bridget Jones's diary is worth thinking about is it actually tells you quite a lot about romantic comedy in 2001, romantic comedy as it struggled to get to grips with sexuality, female sexuality, in a way that I don't think you would say was really to the fore in Jane Austen, and also a work that had, as you say, a very good actress in the lead role and a good supporting cast. There is also something comfortably out of date about Bridget Jones's diary, just as there is something comfortably out of date about Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is more obviously out of date. You know, the settings, people going around in carriages, people, as you correctly say, obsessed with issues of class. Bridget Jones's diary is also somewhat out of date. It's a comfortable world, filmed before the War on Terror, the Twin Towers, filmed in the affluence after the end of the Cold War, filmed in a world which actually is fairly liberal. It's a metropolitan world in which, yes, you can and do make mistakes, and you can and do suffer for them, but actually upset is only taken so far. So it's a classic, and we are discussing this in January, it's a classic winter shtick. You might have a cold, you might feel miserable, watch Bridget Jones's diary. As you say, the jokes are rather corny, the ones about the sweaters, jumpers, cardigans, whatever you want to call them, vests, I think you might call them in America, God alone knows. But it's actually quite pleasant. But let me assure you of one point. As the author of England in the Age of Austen, and a relatively large book, let me assure you the 2004 version of Pride and Prejudice is not an accurate portrayal of the novel. That's not making it bad. It's a good film. Doesn't make it bad at all, but it does not accurately portray the novel. It presents Miss Bennet in a kind of proto-romantic Wuthering Heights fashion, with her standing, on a crest in the Peak District. That is actually Elizabeth Bennet as a romantic heroine, capital R romantic, but in fact Jane Austen's novel is very much set in a pre-romantic world. So I just like to add that point.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Black. Mr. Haslar, you may proceed with your first exhibit. I'd also be interested if you've written a book about Jane Austen. That might be useful.
I have done it. It hasn't been published, but as the only reader of said book, I say it's very well received.
Oh, very well then. Carry on.
You don't know this. I've actually read it for the publishers. It's Jane Austen and Dracula, and it actually is quite an interesting work, rather more lurid than possibly you might anticipate.
From Ben, no, we anticipate much luridness. All right, Mr. Haslar, please present your case.
Let's compare the two protagonists, Elizabeth versus Bridget. Pride and Prejudice has an emphasis on realism, and Bridget Jones is a comedy containing elements of very lowbrow humor, which is very much to Pride and Prejudice's advantage when comparing the two female protagonists. Elizabeth is always steadfast in what she wants and desires as a character. She loves her sisters, she's looking for a match, and she's concerned about the future. None of this changes throughout the film. What changes is her perception of Mr. Darcy. Bridget Jones is introduced as a perpetually single woman, yet within minutes of the film's start, she begins a relationship with this slimeball Cleaver played by Hugh Grant. Jones, we know.
Can I just interrupt there? No. This slimeball Hugh Grant, played by Hugh Grant.
Yeah, he wasn't.
He
We
did
were all
not know they
saying-
were making a movie.
He was typecast, yes. But he's a slime ball. Bridget knows he's a slime ball. We, the audience, know he's a slime ball. So why are we rooting for this thing to happen? Why are we sitting here as this whole thing progresses? We're not really on Bridget's side on this one. Pride and Prejudice, while not a comedy, it does have funny elements in it. Elizabeth and Jane trying to have a conversation while dancing and constantly moving towards and away from each other, or the way Mrs. Bennet clears the breakfast table out so Mr. Collins can speak to Elizabeth, or the daughters straightening up the room and dressing up with ribbons hurriedly and then appearing perfectly calm as Bingley and Darcy enter. The comedy works in this film. Bridget Jones, in comparison, it can get a little lowbrow at times. I think the worst element is them fixating on Bridget sliding down this fireman's pole as her ass hits the camera, and they play it again and again. Although they keep saying like Bridget Jones is fat in the film, it's supposed to be like her defining character trait in the book, but Renee Zellweger does not look overweight to me, not at all. They also casually drop discriminatory epithets in Bridget Jones, like the Japanese are cruel people, or this person's a poof. And there's no real rebuke to any of this. It's just sort of there because that's a character trait, right? People say these things. I pass to the defense.
They certainly do say those things, and they did. Mr. Black, would you like to comment on comparing the two heroines here?
Yes, I mean, I think that the portrayal can be irritating. I think it's supposed to be irritating. I think Bridget Jones is supposed to be flaky. She is supposed to be not perfect. And if one has a misogynistic mindset, I hope I don't, you can feel the worse of her. I actually think she comes across, and as I said, for a January winter film on a wet afternoon, which we get lots of in this part of England, I think she comes across as somebody who's sympathetically human as opposed to perfect. So in other words, it is ironically a comment on a view of Jane Austen.
But would you not say that applies to Elizabeth as well? She is also imperfect. She's prejudiced.
Yes, but Elizabeth, I think you're right. Elizabeth has many qualities that the Bridget Jones doesn't have. I think you're absolutely right. A kind of steadiness, a kind of emotional maturity, a kind of consciousness of the world she is in. She has enough wit and sense to reject Mr. Collins. You have to wonder whether Bridget Jones would, in the equivalent term, as it were, gone off with him for a brief period. Mm-hmm. I mean, he is the slime ball, if you like, of the other novel. The other point I'd make particularly, as you will know, I mean, when we originally discussed this, and listeners can blame me for the suggestion, I originally suggested that we compare, or rather contrast, Bridget Jones with the Colin Firth version of Pride and Prejudice, which quite properly we in the end didn't do, because that's a 6-part television series.
5 hours long.
Well, I've watched it. It's good. But the point being that the film version, which was not by any means the first film version, and it would generally not be considered the best film version. The Laurence Olivier version would generally be considered the best. But the film version was, in a sense, the comment on a very successful television version. So the originality often that you're talking about rests in the television series. The major change for the film version was they presented Elizabeth in a more, as I said, Wuthering Heights fashion, which, may well interest the listener, or the viewer, I should say, just as some of them would sympathize with Bridget Jones. It's not, as it were, wrong. It's just not happened to be what's in Pride and Prejudice.
And they changed the time period as well, I believe.
Yeah, they check, I mean, there are other things that they did. And in fact, I would say personally, the film quality is higher in the film than in the television. It actually looks better. I think the color palette is more successful. What is interesting is that you've got everybody wearing a bit more relaxed clothing and a bit less buttoned up, including Darcy, incidentally. But going back, I am not in any way going to deny that there are, I'm sure we're going to come to this repeatedly, that there are significant faults in Bridget Jones. All I'm going to say is it actually captures quite well, as you say, the nature of a 2001 rom-com with all the inconsistencies and flaws of that period.
All right, going back to you, Mr. Haslar, don't let me step on your next point if this was it, but would you like to talk about the two Mr. Darcys as well?
That is exactly my next point. Thank you.
Oh, very good. That's what we want to hear.
Because of his work in the miniseries, people do tend to identify the character with Colin Firth, but don't count out Matthew Macfadyen's Darcy out. He portrays Darcy as being very proud and unpleasant in the early scenes, but we can also, as an audience, see that he feels something for Elizabeth in both his facial expressions and the way he speaks. His character is understandable. It makes you wonder if perhaps he's on the spectrum somewhere, and that just vocabulary wasn't, in Jane Austen's time at the writing, but clearly would make sense as to why he behaves the way he does in this party, where he, doesn't like to go out and approach strangers, but he does care. He is a good man, and that is clearly on display. The reason Elizabeth is prejudiced against Darcy makes complete and total sense. Wickham's motivations also seem more real in this film. He's simply not relating the whole story with his relationship to Darcy and casts himself as the innocent victim. So many people do that. Whereas in Bridget Jones, Cleaver just flat out lies about Darcy, but not only does he just lie, he pins Darcy for a crime that he himself did. He realizes, oh, that must have broken Darcy's heart. That's good. I'm going to use that. I'm going to say it was my heart that was broken. I might also add that Pride and Prejudice, Darcy being aloof in their initial encounters makes a lot of sense. He explains not being accustomed, but he helps Elizabeth into this carriage, and you can see his hand flex afterwards, sort of visually explaining that emotion that's in that time. Whereas in Bridget Jones, why was Colin Firth so rude in that first scene? Did I miss it? Why the hell does he flat out say to his mother that she's horrible and she smokes like a chimney, and then does a complete 180 in a scene later to say, hey, I love you just the way you are? Something just doesn't add up here.
What do you think, Professor Black? Does it add up?
Well, I think that's a very good point. I think for both of the characters, there is a degree of asociability. In the case of Darcy, it is attributed by Jane Austen to his pride. In the case of the Colin Firth portrayal, I think it would be regarded as a certain way in which British males are often presented, both in British, in French, I can also add, and in American films, and a way that often captures their social inadequacy, gaucheness, as a result of a whole host of issues. So I'm not sure I would regard that as I'm not sure that I would regard the Colin Firth portrayal as inaccurate, nor would I regard the one of Darcy as inaccurate in either the television or the film that we're talking about. I think the actors are playing to a script in each case, and I would say those actors play to the script well. Now, you can discuss the flaws of the script, and I suppose what you could fairly say is that Bridget Jones's diary, the characters are not fully realized. They particularly the male characters, are archetypes, and you have the classic feature of an archetypal film. Now, I've recently been writing a book about Gothic novels, and in Gothic novels, you have exactly the same situation. You have archetypal characters. Now, from the point of view of a realist, you can say, well, this is ridiculous. Actually, it doesn't help you very much. The great Gothic writers were intending them to be archetypes. And indeed, just as you were discussing James Bond earlier, there's a famous book by Umberto Eco on how Fleming writes his Bond books as archetypes, and Eco argues that he is actually parallel in that to the, rather improbably, the libretto of Wagnerian operas.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's not necessarily helpful to criticize any medium that works on archetype. You can think of the Kill Bill Japanese scenes. From the point of view of realism, it doesn't take you very far, or to my mind, it doesn't.
I think that's a fair point. Ben, what would you like to bring up next?
Well, to continue on Elizabeth and Darcy together in Pride and Prejudice, their love is very profound. The journey we take from her prejudice to devotion feels very natural in light of the fact that she just didn't have all the facts. Their love continuing into fruition is very romantic while also staying very real. On Darcy's second proposal, we can see and feel that love permeating off of the screen without the cliched kisses that other films rely on, which brings us to Bridget Jones. The love profession between those two characters is contrived as hell, with Darcy reading some lines from her diary, and then, I would justifiably take off when she describes him as being hateful or whatever. But that reveal isn't in the film yet. He's leaving. Bridget Jones sees him, screams at the top of her lungs from the bedroom. He apparently loves her, but she doesn't know that. But he pretends he doesn't hear and keeps trudging off in the snow. And Bridget Jones goes and chases after him in her underwear, screaming at the tops of her lungs, where he can still clearly hear her. And then he comes out of a diary store saying, "Oh, I got you this new diary," but he hides it, in his coat pocket. It's not in a bag like you would normally do when you buy a diary. No, we got to get this big cliche kiss at the end that, oh, he completely understands her.
This is why you're single, Ben. You can't just dump a woman because she wrote something bad about you in her diary.
Order in the court, please, Trey. This will not turn into a referendum on Ben's relationships.
Can I just say, I'm not saying that I necessarily think the scripting of Bridget Jones's diary is fantastic. What I'm simply saying is that I think they actually carry it off quite well. That's what I would say it. Just as I think the same is true of that version of Pride and Prejudice. The script that they are offered is not brilliant because it's a script which is shot through with the social assumptions of the late 18th, early 19th century, which are social assumptions which really don't pertain today. So instead of which, what you get in both Bridget Jones and in the Pride and Prejudice is an emphasis on a classic form of romantic story, which is the notion of challenges overcome. I mean, it's interesting that you comment, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just saying, it's interesting that you...
No, let him have it. Let him have it.
No. It's just interesting what people take from anything. We all take different things. It's interesting that what you take is Darcy becoming, as it were, more obviously romantic. Actually, I think that what would have been more impressive to the original readers is Darcy's effort, major effort, to save the family's reputation vis-a-vis Wickham, and the considerable way in which he, as it were, moves himself into kind of a modern chivalric knight to do so. Mm-hmm. That, I think, would have been more impressive to contemporaries, and that in a way would sorry to interrupt, and that in a way would be shown as justifying Elizabeth's what in that period they would have thought of as a less equal, more devotional approach, rather than one of equal romantic love, although they were starting to move more towards equal romantic love in some of the literature. So, I mean, I think what you could fairly say is that in Bridget Jones, the challenges are a bit bizarre. Cleaver is so obviously vile. Mm-hmm. Colin Firth is so obviously portrayed as socially inadequate. Mm-hmm. Bridget Jones is so obviously flaky. the three of them are moving around in a bemusing and bemused fashion. The only person who appears to know, but does he really know what he wants, is the rake. And in a way, there is the idea that the rake discovers that being a libertine isn't enough, which is a classic moral reading of the situation. The heroine discovers that you should put to one side what you are attracted to for some reason or other, and instead appreciate that there are other virtues and values to seek. And they, they both do it in their own way. I mean, you could, if you were sitting there as a rationalist, say of both of these, this is ridiculous.
This is ridiculous.
You could easily say that. You could say, for a kickoff, somebody of Darcy's wealth and social position is not going to be hitched up with, having to put up with Mrs. Bennet as his bloody mother-in-law. He's going to be concerned for social status, on the way to try and move up the aristocracy, and etc., etc. But they are both in their own way pleasant and pleasing illusions, which is the nature of a romantic comedy. One of them has the strengths and the weaknesses of being the film version of a famous novel. It has the strengths because it can draw on that plot, it can draw on the fact that it would pull out the audience, and it can draw on the fact you'll get great actors and actresses willing to play the role. But it has the weaknesses that there's only so much you can do with Pride and Prejudice if you're not going to bring in zombies.
They did later.
Whereas Bridget Jones has, I would say, the weaknesses of a less good plot or less good writing, but on the other hand has the strength that it is an attempt to set a story in modern Britain. It has a lot of ridiculous aspects of it, but so did Notting Hill, for example. So did the Hugh Grant one, Love Actually. Lots of these romantic comedies are ridiculous once you slow them down and have a look at them.
And all conspicuously British. I'm going to cut you off there real quick, Jeremy, so we can let Ben make his final, other final points he has. No, you're on a roll. It's great, but Ben has to make a case too.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is my final point. It is the filmmaking. Okay. Pride and Prejudice shines over Bridget Jones in both writing and the way it looks. On the side of writing, the movie is tight. Every character in the film serves a purpose to the overall end. And the degree to which they contribute, if it isn't all that high, then they're put into the background where they belong, because this is Elizabeth and Darcy's story. This is where the focus should be. In Bridget Jones, her friends don't serve that purpose. Like, tell me anything about either one of her girlfriends. They're just there because
one
cries. She probably have friends. There's also this sort of subplot with Bridget's parents that just doesn't seem to, it's just there to eat up time. The film, it's an hour and a half, so we need to get it to that point. The mom is going off dating some TV guy for a bit, and then comes back to her ex saying, hey, let's get back together again. And he's like, okay. I'm like, what was the point of that? And it's also ridiculous that this fight in Bridget Jones involves them going through a restaurant, crashing through a window, and there's like no repercussions whatsoever. Like, everyone just watches both of them walk off without any word at all. This doesn't feel like a genuine moment to me, even within the context of a comedy, especially within this universe that they've created.
Well, I can tell you as a judge, it is legal if someone yells "fight" really loud. It's all fair.
Even broken windows?
100%.
Oh, there was a fight. Okay, I misunderstood. Thank you.
Yeah, no. If someone
they
yells
reimburse
fight,
you for that if you say fight.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. That's
I'll remember
supposed to say World Star
next time that happens.
They didn't have that in 2000. They didn't have that in 2001. I'm going to have to overrule a guy in the jury. That makes no sense. All right.
Pride and Prejudice is also a much more cinematic film with gorgeous use of natural sunlight, candlelight, and it takes the depth of that novel, but adds that beauty of scope to it, which, the book lacked. It wasn't a visual book. So this film elevates the material to that level. There's a great scene also in a ball where the camera ties together favorite moments from the book while also illustrating the state of every character's feeling in that moment, all in one take as the camera moves room to room. And as my ace in the hole, I have Donald Sutherland. He nails every character he portrays. He captures how Mr. Bennet kind of grumbles about the foolishness of his wife and shows how much he cares for his daughters in the moments that they need him. His joy when he realizes Elizabeth loves Mr. Darcy is a great moment in acting. Nothing in Bridget Jones even hits those marks. Bridget Jones's dad is just a dweeb. With that, the Pride and Prejudice will rest.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Haslar. Mr. Black, you may now proceed with any additional points you would like to make for your case.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Neither of us have talked about a factor which is worth thinking about for both of the films, which is the soundtrack. I think that's quite interesting. I mean, I think that's an aspect of the, as it were, 2001 anchoring of Bridget Jones. And I mean, I think it's interesting that one tends to ignore that. It was actually quite, I think it worked. As far as the ball is concerned, of course, that wasn't the first use of that for the ball. I mean, it had been done in the television series again. I mean, it was almost a cliche of the visual versions of Pride and Prejudice. I mean, I think what we're on is really on the same sort of lines here, that there are lots of flaws of Bridget Jones, but it's a more original work. Pride and Prejudice, the film, is a pretty good, it's not by any means fantastic, but it's a pretty good version of the novel. And I think that's where we should be comfortable. I think, where we actually, it's up to the jury, distinguished jurors here, but it's where you put that as the best film is, I think, rather problematic. But that's, I mean, I would say, how do you compare a version of Shakespeare, for example, a version of Hamlet, with something which is an attempt to sort of riff off Hamlet, but very much in the modern world?
The Lion King.
Yeah. But I think these have been useful to discuss. I hope, by the way, if I can be really rude, though, that listeners will cut in and press the reels of justice, because this was my second choice. My first choice was Paddington 2 versus Shrek 2.
We'll do it.
We're getting to that.
We're going to
don't believe
in
we
time.
should do that. Anyway, there we go.
It.
We will.
But this
we promise.
Jeremy,
we
this
will
is the Valentine's Day episode. We had to do the romantic movie.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yes.
Well, I have
Happy
to say,
Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. Yes.
On the romantic side, I actually think the Pride and Prejudice more conforms to possibly what many people today would like to think of as a stylized Valentine's Day. Bridget Jones is more a mess that possibly tells one slightly more about real life.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Would you like to rest on that, Jeremy?
Yes, I'd like to rest on that.
All right, I like that. It's a good one to go out on. All right, Mr. Haslar, you may now present your closing statement.
Jane Austen versus Helen Fielding. Point to Pride and Prejudice. Keira Knightley versus Renee Zellweger. Well, okay, probably a tie if I'm being honest. Matthew McFadden versus Colin Firth. Okay, I'll also give you that one, but it's not a blowout. But going down the rest of the list, I've got Dame Judi Dench, I've got Donald Sutherland and Rosamund Pike. You've got overrated pretty boy Hugh Grant. The math doesn't lie, my friend. It's in the jury. All you have to do is consider just how wrong Bridget Jones got it when they chastised Colin Firth for wearing a Christmas sweater. He was way ahead of his time in this film. And it's all the rage now. The numbers have it. Pride and Prejudice wins. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haslar. Mr. Black, you may present your closing statement.
Well, very briefly, the Christmas sweater and the messiness of real life. I can remember enough Christmases where one was supposed to wear a sweater like that. Every man seeing that film, being dragged along by their girlfriend or wife, would have recognized exactly what was going on. And they would have found it also, men of a different generation, easier to identify with Jim Broadbent playing the dad than with Donald Sutherland playing some figure from 200 years earlier. So I'm not going to say this is an absolute clear cutter. I'm going to say these are different films, but one of the strengths of Bridget Jones is that in its ditzy, self-indulgent fashion, with its rather wonky script, it nevertheless captures the messiness of life at a certain stage.
Well, thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Robb Maynard, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, and Mr. Nice Boys Don't Kiss Like That, Ryan Luis Rodriguez.
Oh, yes, they fucking do.
Order,
what
please.
does that mean?
Order, please. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine which is the superior film. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room, the deliberation tea room, to render your verdict.
I've made you all some blue leak soup to go with you, with plenty of toxic blue dye number 34. Eat up.
Thank you, Mr. Bailiff.
All right, boys. What are we thinking? Robb?
Going into this, I was like, God, we have to watch some Jane Austen stuff, Pride and Prejudice, and then some chick flick like Bridget Jones. I expected that I would not enjoy these films. And then about 20 minutes into Pride and Prejudice, it was like, no, Elizabeth, you can't go with Mr. Wickham. Your heart's clearly with Mr. Darcy. I was completely sucked in, really to both of them. And I ended up enjoying both films, which surprised me because they're not my speed. You feel the same way, Schlender?
I'm raising my hand. If you subscribe to the Patreon, you can see the video.
There is
I'm exactly where Maynard was. I was like, oh man, a period romance piece, and then Bridget Jones is like a chick flick from the early 2000s. How well is that going to hold up? And no, I ended up enjoying both films immensely. So I'm actually really glad we did this head to head.
Yeah, totally got sucked into it. Great for a Valentine's Day episode as this is. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Especially Ryan, Ryan, who is Dylan's Valentine, I believe.
That's true.
Yes, that is
true. These were both good points. And for me, after the movies, I really couldn't make my mind up. The strengths that I see for Pride and Prejudice, visually, it wins hands down. All of the sets, all of the costumes, it just looks fantastic.
Yeah. Cinematography is amazing in that film.
Oh yeah, well that's what the guy's known for too. Joe Wright, I think is the director's name, right? Like that's his bread and butter right there. So
yeah. Elizabeth to Bridget, I couldn't really find why two people would fight over Bridget, really, because she knows she's sort of frumpy. And she kind of has no real confidence about it. You
should watch the new Australian series, The Tourist, in which the female protagonist is very much like that, and she actually comes across as the most attractive person in the series. It's a good series, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't find Bridget that attractive, and for someone who had described themselves as seemingly unlucky in love up to then, suddenly she's swimming in offers. So compared to Keira Knightley, who seems to be obviously is gorgeous, but also seems to be really strong-willed in a time where all the other women around her seem very complacent. I can see why people would be attracted to her. I'm actually surprised more people weren't attracted to her. I'm surprised that.
No. Can I just say, nobody's going to be attracted to her because, as Mr. Collins points out, she is going to inherit absolutely nothing. It's he, Collins, who will inherit her father's possession because of the nature of the inheritance. And if you read the novel, Collins is a horrible person. And he's
very funny in the movie, though. Funniest guy in the movie.
And indeed, even funnier in the six-parter. But the point is, that she is a very bad prospect. And Jane Austen is in a way writing about, to a degree, herself, because Jane Austen, of course, never got married and wondered whether in part that was because she was a bad prospect.
She might be a bad prospect in the novel, and this might be where the novel differentiates from the film. But as a modern viewer of the period piece, Keira Knightley was the winner forever.
It is a little hard to get into that headspace. That's I don't want to steal this point that you made, Maynard, but you brought up, like, when you watch these old timey movies where they're doing something kind of new, you know, like the headstrong woman, and that's attractive. It's like, well, that's what we're used to now anyway. I get why it was a big deal back then. You could definitely see the foundation that Pride and Prejudice laid down for what ultimately evolved into kind of like what we would call chick flicks and like these romantic comedies like Bridget Jones. So like the thread is definitely there. The connective tissue is definitely there, which I thought made it very interesting to watch.
And then my last thing, just comparing the two Darcys, I mean, both Darcys seem contemptible nearly the entire time. I mean, even when they're kind, they're dull and incredibly stiff. And, you know, I'm not sure why they're supposed to be sort of the romantic object when, like I said, I don't see much appeal in them. But at least you can understand why Darcy in Pride and Prejudice has reservations about Elizabeth because of the class thing, and he has to overcome that because of her attractiveness. But you can't really see what connection Darcy has to Bridget. They just get together because that's what the script calls for, because they're trying to remake Pride and Prejudice. There doesn't seem to be any genuine connection there. Ryan,
they just
heard
kinda,
from you. What do you think?
Other. Yeah, what do you got, Ryan?
I think, well, like Bridget Jones, I would say, is an above average rom-com. But, you know, with Pride and Prejudice, sitting down to watch it, I was apprehensive because I'm not terribly versed in Jane Austen. I think she's too rich for my blood. But, you know, I don't think I can identify with it because I'm not a 19th century landowner.
Are you sure?
So maybe I'm pretty positive. I'm not totally sure, but I think I'm positive. But
so I've been calling you a baron for months now. How embarrassing.
But like I realized as I was watching Pride and Prejudice that I had seen this story before because I'd seen Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. So that was my entry point into this film. But as I was watching it, I was not necessarily absorbed with Keira Knightley's character because Rosamund Pike is in the movie. And as soon as she shows up, I'm just like, okay, I'm paying attention. Gotcha. But then as the movie went on, I kept on thinking like, so which daughter am I? And as watching, I was like, I'm totally Mary. I'm a loner, unimpressed with anything. I'm plain. I'm untalented. I am totally Mary.
I love Mary.
But I guess like comparing the two, I would say that they're both 3-star movies, which is not a bad thing. It's not a great thing. But I think that if I'm comparing the two of the 3 stars, I guess if we're going to put this in letterbox terms, Pride and Prejudice gets the heart in addition to the 3 stars. And I think that is the superior film, not just in terms of how it looks and kind of how it feels and how it channels the period, but just in terms of which is a more satisfying film. I enjoyed Bridget Jones quite a bit. It made me want to watch the sequel, which I've heard nothing but negative things about. Yeah, there's 2. But I've heard nothing but negative things about the second one. But I was absorbed enough in the story that I would like to watch it. So
I literally said the same thing too. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm leaning towards Pride and Prejudice, if we're being honest.
And we should be honest. We're in the jury. We have to make the call. Yeah, no. So just to re-echo a few things, like, again, I was much more impressed with both movies than I thought I would be. Pride and Prejudice actually had me laughing a lot. Like, I thought there was a lot of good humor in there. I do like the realism, like, just talk about the cases for a moment that Jeremy was talking about with Bridget Jones. Like, these felt like kind of like she felt like a real lived in character that we've really got to see a lot of, and everyone else around her was archetypes, like he said, you know. So I guess that's fair, and that it kind of explains why like the Darcy connection seemed more attenuated. We didn't get to see Mr. Darcy's diary, you know. We didn't get into anyone else's head except hers. Mayor and I were talking like, is she really even a reliable narrator? Like, is some of this stuff
We
happening?
thought she was fantasizing for the while when she starts the relationship with Hugh Grant, because it's like, really, like this girl that no one's noticed all of a sudden has the eye of Hugh Grant.
I think part of that, they kind of implied that like they kind of maybe had a little flirtation here and there, and that's why she was dead set against him when she made the New Year's resolution.
Do you not think, can I just ask, do you not think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because, I watched this 20 years ago and my memory isn't as good as it should be, but for as far as I remember, it's the first rom-com in which there was a mention of anal sex. And I think no, but the
very briefly mentioned.
You're discounting body heat.
I know, but the point about it is that is quite interesting. First of all, it helps to put Hugh Grant as a nasty piece of work, but also somebody who is exploiting Bridget Jones, possibly because she is different and seems vulnerable to him. So I think that's that element, which seems actually quite prescient for 2001, maybe less prescient today, but quite prescient for 2001. But also because I think what was interesting about that film is it has lots of faults. I'm not denying that for a second, but there is also at places in it a real edginess which isn't there in, for example, Notting Hill or the Love One, with Hugh Grant as Prime Minister. And I think that Renée Zellweger brings off that edginess quite well. Yes, she is. I think you're right. The reason I brought this up is I think she is, to a degree, fantasizing, and she is the victim of her fantasies. But what that is a more realistic account of human beings than one in which fantasy doesn't really play much of a role, which is what you've got, I think, in Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, no, I think that's basically the point that I agree with most, and like, I just kind of like how real Bridget Jones is in that regard. So maybe we should start locking in some votes, Maynard, unless you want to respond to something.
Bridget Jones feels very real. The situations she's in don't, to me. And I think that's because attempting to modernize a story like Pride and Prejudice, which feels like a period kind of piece, where people who don't know each other all that well suddenly fall in love, which
like
is a thing of that time,
and things,
is very difficult to modernize. I don't think you can just pick it up and move it into 2001 and it works. Bridget Jones really doesn't know anything, knows about as much about Darcy as we do. And it's very little. And for them to basically throw away a lot of their lives to commit to each other, I didn't believe it. Bridget Jones, I believe, is a person. Her situation she's in, I don't. And so considering the visual component, I give it to Pride and Prejudice. So I am going with Pride and Prejudice.
All right. I'm going to give the edge to Bridget Jones just by a hair.
Any reason why?
Well, because honestly, it's all on Renée Zellweger. I think the character of Bridget Jones, her life, the situation she was in, drinking the wine, watching Frasier, obsessing about her weight.
She's just a female you.
I don't have to answer that. I'm not on trial here. Ryan, dial us in.
I'm going Pride and Prejudice. Easy.
All right, then. All right.
All right, let's go tell that very handsome judge.
You're my Valentine. Come on. Okay, forget it. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of Pride and Prejudice 2005 versus Bridget Jones' Diary, we find in favor of Pride and Prejudice.
All right. The verdict is so rendered. Pride and Prejudice will be waiting outside in the rain for Mr. Haslar. Please run out there, sweep it up, and give it a big kiss and live happily ever after. Court is adjourned.
Well, this is Hugh Grant here at the Reels of Justice outside the courthouse. You see, Mr. Haslar, if I could impress upon you for your thoughts upon the jury's rendering this day.
Thank you, Hugh. I'm relieved because I had a huge stack of notes, whereas Mr. Black can just pull this stuff out of the top of his head. I thought I was just flailing at certain points. And I'm informed that when I went to go get a Kit Kat in the snack machine, he burst into the jury room and started making more points. So I thought I was completely dead in the water here. But hats off to my competitor. He knows so much. He's just a font of knowledge, and I look forward to debating The Grudge with him at a future date. Thank you.
I'm sure that will be quite a grudge match. Now, Mr. Black, if I could inquire upon your thoughts upon the jury's verdict this day.
Oh, no grudge at all. I think it's always very interesting to judge between films. I thought the juror who said they were both, I think it was Ryan, they were both 3-star. I think he got it right. I think
he usually does.
Sorry?
He usually does.
But no, I think that's a perfectly reasonable verdict. I think they serve different purposes. I think they're both worth watching. I'm delighted that you two both found them interesting to watch. And, I don't ordinarily watch rom-coms. I was quite pleased to have I've watched all 3 of the Bridget Jones ones. I think the second one is actually... like most franchises, it finds it difficult to keep going. The second one has things to be said for it. The third one, I think, is bloody awful. But I would say to most people, it's better to watch a new film rather than to watch a franchise. And in a way, I would just stick with the original Bridget Jones. For those interested in Jane Austen, a plug for my book, which actually I think is quite interesting and would probably tell you more about Pride and Prejudice than watching the film. But if you want to watch the film, I would say to you, also look at the 6-part television thing and at the Laurence Olivier, all of which are worth watching.
Thank you. I also don't go in much for rom-coms. They frighten me to a certain extent. Now, we'll go back to the studio. I've got a prostitute waiting in my car.
Oh, God.
So was that Hugh Grant or was that Woody Allen?
I don't know. It wasn't really
a little bit of
pre-thought
column A, a
out,
little bit of
Ryan.
column B.
Not everything
Allen.
can be mumbly, you know.
He was going for weirdo pervert, so of course some Woody
Barry
Allen
nailed it.
Can I just say something on films? At the end of my Jane Austen book, I do discuss the film aspect of the Jane Austen novels. And what is fascinating is that 2 of the novels, Pride and Prejudice and Emma, have had the overwhelming concentration of the visual representation. Whereas, for example, not very much has been done with Mansfield Park or Northanger Abbey. And it's very interesting, each of which have very similar plots to a great extent. And it's very interesting to consider for those, and I'm assuming those people that watch these programs are interested in films, why it is if you take an individual novelist, some of those films work more than others. Some of those novels work more than others for filming. And I'm afraid to say, I don't think it has anything to do with the quality of the plot. And I think it has everything to do with the fact that people prefer to copy what other filmmakers have made.
Yeah. It's like the first one.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Is big, and nothing else can really follow it up. But Jeremy, what's been keeping you busy? You have some more novels to plug for us?
I've got lots more films, but let me just tell you, I've got my own books. Yeah, I've just brought out a book on strategy in the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Age, which you will all have read, of course. But no, I had my daughter over from Brooklyn, the same age as Bridget Jones, incidentally, 32. And she had some list from an American some film thing of 100 films you should have always watched before you died. And being young, she hadn't watched a lot of the older ones. So we watched some of them over Christmas, and most of them I'd seen already, obviously. Pulp Fiction. Watching it again for the 3rd time, I thought, wow, I think it's a wonderful film. I love the things that they play around with time. I was amazed at the language again. I'd forgotten that. Annie Hall, I thought that still worked. Maltese Falcon, I thought worked. Yeah. I'd never seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We didn't like it and we switched it off.
What?
The
That's a
Wonderful
great
World,
movie.
okay.
Yeah, it's
okay,
because
I'm
you're
just telling
British.
you.
Exactly.
I'm not-
It's not as good as
I'm not-
Mr. Smith Goes
We
to
can went to
Manchester.
Buckingham.
No. Of other films I saw not on Pippa's list, I saw a new film, The Dig. I thought that was very good. That's a British film. I saw an American film, Passing, which I thought was excellent. Rebecca Hall directed that. It's about a African-American passing herself off as white in early 20th century America. Beautifully made, just in black and white. Very good film.
Oh, so it's a
And I
reverse
saw-
reverse Black Like Me.
Sorry?
Then it's like a reverse Black Like Me.
Yes, I bet it's a good film. And I saw a film I've seen before. I saw it when it came out, but I hadn't seen it since. That was the Coppola film, The Conversation, which on a second watching work, and I could remember what happened, works extremely well. And it's fascinating to see a young Harrison Ford, of course, playing a role in it. So I've seen quite a few films, but I've also been reading a lot of novels.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And yeah, we always ask for recommendations. You just gave us a ton of them. And any others you want to toss in as your
Which is the
official
best one of those,
recommendation?
though. Which is the best of those lists.
Yeah.
The best of that list, that's interesting. For acting, Gene Hackman in The Conversation. For visual quality, I would say Passing. For wit in scripting, but also in the actual use of time, I would say Pulp Fiction.
So Jeremy just gave the listeners a Valentine's Day gift. It's a box of movies. You open it up, you pluck one out, and there you go.
And there's nothing more romantic than Pulp Fiction.
Absolutely.
Another film with sodomy. You see, it dared to, and it happened long before Bridget Jones. So, Big Ben, you were the successful counselor this week. So, what is your recommendation?
I'm going to recommend a film that sort of bridges the gap between the two we talked about today, and because it has both Colin Firth and Dame Judi Dench in it, and she's playing much the same character as she did in Pride and Prejudice, which is the proper disapproving of the proposed match relative, and that's 2002's The Importance of Being Earnest.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Wow!
High five, Master Black.
Yeah, that's a brilliant film.
Unfortunately, Jim Varney does not make so much of as a cameo in this film. But we do have a rather fun comedy here based on the works of Oscar Wilde, where the two men both have the pseudonym of Ernest, and they both try to maintain this as they fall for different women. And both of these women also say they could not love a man if he did not have the name of Ernest. It's silly, but delightful and well worth an hour and a half of your time.
Oscar
I want to
Wilde
see
is
it.
so
I've only
silly.
seen the 1940s one, which I adore, but now I really want to see the 2002 version.
Hey, Jeremy, are you going to write a book about Oscar Wilde?
No, I've got a book coming out. You know, I've just brought out a book on Agatha Christie. I've got a book coming out on Sherlock Holmes and on Arthur Conan Doyle soon.
Oh, that would be awesome. We'll have to get you hooked up with Matthew J. Elliott on that one.
Can I just say, on the importance of being earnest, the one you're talking about, the Colin Firth, Rupert Everett one, Judi Dench one, is really good. The only thing that's a bit disappointing is it's generally agreed that Judi Dench wasn't as good in the role as Margaret Rutherford in the old black and white version. But the Colin Firth, Rupert Everett, and also the way they use things like the balloon, the fantasy scenes in which there's imagination as if one's a pre-Raphaelite, those are very good and they're imaginative and they give it a fresh feel. So yes, I would very much agree. That version of The Importance of Being Earnest is well worth watching.
I'm with you.
Schlenzo, you were the judge. What's your recommendation?
Oh, well, thank you very much. So when I think of Valentine's Day, I immediately think of Harry Connick Jr. I mean, who better? So I'm recommending 2007's P.S. I Love You, starring Hilary Swank, Gerard Butler, and the aforementioned Harry Connick Jr. Hilary Swank plays a widow. She's the widow of Gerard Butler, who had passed, and she receives a series of letters from him from beyond the grave. But it's not a scary story. It's a very romantic, very heartfelt story about not moving on from your grief, but carrying it with you as you move forward in your life and in your love.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. From Beyond
Absolutely.
the Grave. So frightens
It's
you to a certain extent.
spooky.
Spooky.
Yeah.
Ryan,
Okay, it's not that spooky.
Ryan, what's your recommendation?
My recommendation this week concerns Colin Firth, as it's supposedly
popular.
his favorite film that he's ever worked on, and that is 2008's Mamma Mia. If you told me a decade ago that I would have seen this infectiously, intensely watchable movie, loved it, and recommended it on a podcast, I would say, who are you? And what's a podcast? But I have seen it, and I really dig it. Mamma Mia is currently for rent on your favorite platform and streaming on Stars for the 15 people who have Stars.
It's funny because Dylan immediately mentioned Mamma Mia yesterday. I think when we were watching Bridget Jones.
No
So
dig
good.
on it, but
Well,
I'm
yeah,
so
because
good.
isn't the conceit for one of the Bridget Jones sequels? She doesn't know who the father is. She's pregnant.
That's
Yeah.
right.
so-
Yeah, that's
Yeah, so
the
that's
baby,
kind of
that's
like
the
a
third
Mamma
one.
Mia, right?
It's a
that's the
Mamma
third one,
Mia-esque.
okay. It's a
exactly.
Mamma
Well, let's
Mia.
say, the original Mamma Mia is very good. The remake is terrible. Absolutely awful.
There's a
On the next Reels of Justice, Ryan. By Jeremy Black.
I'm saving all my energy for Paddington too.
I'll
I
send
can't
us.
wait for that one.
I'll send us on home
Send
here.
us home, Maynard. Send us
I'm
home.
recommending another film based on a Jane Austen novel, as brought up earlier, and that's 2020's Emma,
Yeah, that's brilliant.
directed
Brilliant
by
film.
Autumn de Wilde in her directorial debut. It stars the radiantly enchanting Anya Taylor-Joy, who I would watch read the damn phone book as the titular Emma.
Sad.
Greatest eyes in the business.
Who is a
Hands down.
selfish, arrogant, and vain young woman who manipulates her friends and often acts very thoughtlessly, and she must overcome these shortcomings in order to secure the affections of the most raddest dude in the countrysire. If you liked Pride and Prejudice, I think you'll like this one too. It leans more so into comedy, but the costumes and sets are absolutely outstanding, especially every one of Emma's preposterous outfits. And I was way more invested in the love story in this one than Pride and Prejudice, because Mr. Knightley is actually a completely gallant and likable person,
Yeah, he is.
unlike the oftentimes contemptible and perpetually dull Mr. Darcy. Mr. Knightley does not need any fixing. Instead, this time it is Emma who is the jerk and Knightley the patient one. But obviously the real reason to see this thing is for Anya Taylor-Joy herself, who is the embodiment of all things lovely and charming. Emma is available for rent and purchase in the same places you usually patronize.
Can I just say, actually, I'm interested that you thought that, I mean, I think it's a great film. The actor who I thought was best in that film was Bill Nighy as her father, who I think is brilliant. And the
He's
thing to
always
bear
good.
in mind when you say she needs fixing, the point is that her attempts to manipulate are motivated on the whole by what she thinks is good intentions. So the problem that she has is a lack of perception in many senses. And what Knightley is Knightley is cleverer than her. There is a degree of misogyny in the film, which is quite interesting. But anyway, I agree.
Yeah,
I
he's definitely judgmental to her, but she may
It is a
outwardly
brilliant
say it's
film.
good intentions, but as far as we see in the film,
brilliant
Yeah.
film.
but as we see in the film, she meddles in her friend's supposed engagement, and she admits right to Knightley it's because she doesn't want to lose her friend, and
Yes.
so
Can
she
I just
knows that
say,
that's not good intentions.
It's closer to Jane Austen than the Pride and Prejudice you liked.
Yeah,
And
I liked Emma more.
He just liked it more than
I
Bridget
liked
Jones.
Emma more. I liked Emma more than Pride and Prejudice, though.
Yeah, you're right.
Overall.
It's a better novel as well.
So is it like Jane Austen's take on Taming the Shrew kind of thing? Or?
That is something we maybe should discuss on another occasion.
I feel it's almost like Pride and Prejudice, but from Darcy's point of view. Darcy realizes how he's wrong and takes it upon himself to fix himself. I mean, Emma isn't pushed into it by Knightley. Knightley does scold her at one point for being incredibly rude to someone who's a bit annoying, but otherwise well-intentioned, who she lashes out at. And Knightley says, you know, that was wrong. It was just wrong to do that. And Emma takes it upon herself to apologize and readjust and try to put everything right so that she feels she is worthy of Knightley.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So at the end of the Shrek Paddington episode, we will compare the oeuvres of Austen and Shakespeare. We've got a full episode for next time Jeremy's
Absolutely.
here.
And we look forward to that.
We
And with
certainly
that,
do.
we're all out of show, but we want to thank Jeremy for joining us as usual. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thank you very much.
We're
And
going to have you back for Shrek and Paddington 2, guaranteed. And we hope everyone else will join us at that time as well, as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Jane Austen.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.